Live from Naples, this is The Morning Break with Jane Ritter.
Morning, everyone. Another sunny but quite cold day here in Naples. This morning, I'm joined by Dario Banegas, and we'll be talking about all things CLIL.
Live from Naples, this is The Morning Break with Jane Ritter on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
As I'm waiting for my guest to join us this morning, I'm going to tell you a little bit about CLIL, for those of you who are not very familiar with it. CLIL, or Content and Language Integrated Learning, is a teaching approach that involves using a foreign language to teach academic subjects. This can be an effective way for students to learn both new language and subject matter simultaneously. So, why might we as teachers consider using CLIL in our classrooms? Several benefits, obviously, to the approach. First, research has shown that learning a new language can have cognitive benefits, such as improving problem solving and critical thinking skills. Additionally, CLIL can help students develop an appreciation and an understanding of other cultures, which can then subsequently foster a sense of global citizenship. And obviously, one of the key aspects of this is careful planning and preparation. And I'm really looking forward to talking to Dario about this, because his research has covered this in several countries. It's a sort of three-tier, very complex process, ranging from Argentina, Colombia, and Spain. Obviously, when you are teaching CLIL, it's important to ensure that both the language and subject matter are being taught at a level appropriate to the students. And another thing that's really important to consider is how you actually assess. It can be a really powerful tool, and it can enhance the learning experience for students. Obviously, by careful planning and implementing, teachers can provide their students with a really rich and meaningful learning experience that both language acquisition and subject matter knowledge. I'm just going to pause for a second, and I will be right back. And good morning, Dario. Welcome to the show, and lovely to have you with me. Well, obviously, I've just been talking a little bit about CLIL, and it's something that I am really passionate about, and I thoroughly enjoyed reading your research paper. I found it fascinating. But before we get on to that, could you just tell our listeners a little bit about you and what you do?
Thank you, Jane, and thank you for the invite. And a little bit about me. Well, I am originally from Argentina, and I am currently working with the University of Edinburgh. And before becoming a full-time academic, I was a teacher of English back in Argentina in secondary schools for almost 20 years, wow. Which is something I'm very proud of, actually, because it's not very common among academics.
No.
But of course, now I am a full-time lecturer, and I am working in 2 different programs. So, that's about me. And I enjoy doing research and working with teachers and students, particularly in Latin America and particularly within CLIL. Which is an approach that I find fascinating and I'm in love with.
in your time as a teacher in secondary schools, did you use CLIL?
Yes, I did. It was a language-driven version of it because it was a state school in Patagonia. And what we did was we started to incorporate topics from science, from history, from other subjects the students were doing together with English. So that's how we, or I personally started with CLIL. And initially, my first contact with the approach, or the notion of combining curriculum content and language learning was through CBI, content-based instruction. That's more Canadian. But then later I found an article, something about CLIL, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. And yeah, and the rest is history.
So at the moment you're lecturing you're on 2 projects. What are they?
So my current projects are about, one is about pluriliteracies, and this is with Professor Doug Coyle, who I usually call the mother of CLIL. She's based at the University of Edinburgh as well. And then my second project is connected to social justice. And we are working with a group of secondary school teachers and students in Argentina. And the idea is that teachers and students create their own teaching and learning materials. And it is to some extent CLIL because they're learning about social justice, inequity, inequality, etc. So the content is that, and the teachers will use it to, of course, teach English through that content. So those are the 2 projects that I am working on at the moment. And I always have other ideas and other things in mind, and I have been told that I need to focus, but I just can't. I find it too boring, to be
What
honest.
are the best things about your job?
The best things about my job are, well, probably the chance to speak to teachers from all over the world, to work with teachers and students, and to see how things develop in practice. So I am always interested in looking at cases of good practice and showcasing things that teachers are doing already in the classroom, and sometimes, well, more often than not, they don't get publicity because these teachers will not necessarily present at a conference or write a paper or have a blog, or they think that what they do is not good enough. And quite the contrary, more often than not, the things that they do are just amazing. So that's one of the things I enjoy the most about my research and about my role. And yeah, because then you hear all these stories and you have the chance to get in touch with so many people, and it's just wonderful. I find it fascinating. And that's usually my source of inspiration to carry on doing research and different projects. Yeah.
Wonderful. And so your tell our listeners how your research paper evolved.
Oh, so this was part of the British Council call for projects. And when we got it, we were hit by the COVID-19 pandemic and all the restrictions around it. So what was initially planned as a project where I would be traveling to Spain and Colombia and Argentina, that never happened.
That's a shame. I bet you're a bit disappointed about that.
Absolutely. And the funny thing is that we got the grant, but we never used it. So my research was 100% free, because we could never use the money, because the money was to fund like the traveling around. So what we did was we carried out the research online, because in the case of Argentina and Colombia, the teacher educators were working online, so they were delivering their sessions online. So I would just join in through Zoom or Teams. And in the case of Spain, by the time we started collecting data, they had already gone back to face-to-face teaching. So they would have a laptop, and I would join in.
So you were hybrid.
Remotely, yes, through a hybrid kind of mode. So it was a bit of a challenge, but that was reality. That was what we had to work with, and there was no way out of that situation, or we couldn't find another. Yes, that was the only option that we had. So that slowed down our processes, but in the end we got wonderful data from the students and the participants, the teacher educators and the students. They just did all these amazing projects and presentations, and it was great because you could listen to their own concerns about implementing CLIL, because what happens usually in teacher education is that we provide theories and examples of this and that, but of course you always have this question of saying all this sounds very lovely and nice, but I'm not sure it will work so wonderfully in practice. So the students really managed to reflect on those tensions between what's in paper, so to speak, and what happens in the classroom. And they found amazing ways of making it work in a manner that was sustainable, in a way that was contextually responsive. So that was fascinating, and this is how we ended up.
For those who are listening that perhaps haven't had a chance to read your paper, what did you aim to do when you started? I can see and there are obviously different. There are different countries and there are different approaches and different outcomes. But what was the aim when you started?
So the main aim was to produce a description of how student teachers are prepared for CLIL in different contexts. So one was, or different types of educational provision. One is where teachers will be teaching a subject in English. And so, for example, we had these two programs based in Colombia and Spain. So these were primary school teachers or science teachers who would be teaching content in English, right? And then the other program, the one based in Argentina, was an English language teacher education program. And so student teachers were expected to use CLIL as a language teaching approach, if you will. So again,
they've both had very different kinds. They've had different preparation, because an ELT preparation is slightly different from a PGCE.
Exactly, yes. They were very different because, for example, in the cases of Colombia and Spain, these student teachers or future teachers did not have strong preparation in English and English language teaching, because they were science teachers and they had taken a few language courses, and their level was maybe B2, B1, B2, whereas the Argentinian students were C1 because that was their program. So they were specifically studying a program to become teachers of English. So it was interesting because, of course, with the Colombian and the Spanish teachers, content wasn't a problem. So their concerns were about how to support the language side, how to make students aware of like grammar and vocab, etc. Whereas in the case of Argentina, the students' teachers' concerns were connected to the content. So they were, of course, good and they were confident about how to support language learning, but they were not confident about teaching content. Right?
Yeah.
So it was really interesting.
Even I can sympathize with that. I'm sort of doing some work with some primary science at the moment, and my main concern is that I can't remember, is it a proton or is it a neutron or is it an electron, and you're having to go back and think about all that science that you haven't looked at for years. It can be quite daunting.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and particularly in the case of secondary school teachers, where the content has to be more critically addressed and more in depth. So this is when student teachers feel quite expectedly, of course, feel less confident about it because they don't know, and they would have to spend more time reading and studying, if you will. So that was a challenge that the students had, which is a challenge that teachers have. Teachers don't feel have. Yes.
And what were the main? Obviously, you can't tell us everything. It's there for people to read. But what do you think were the main outcomes from the research?
So the main outcomes were linked to encouraging teachers and student teachers and their trainers to be more aware of different strategies for teaching and learning, for supporting content, for supporting language. So through the research, we concluded that when student teachers receive more systematic support, and this was probably one of the key findings. So it wasn't that these student teachers were not supported, but it wasn't systematic. So it was just a matter of making sure that when we draw their attention to language, or I don't know how to write different paragraphs or how to write different texts, then they would have the necessary tools to do so. So it was a matter of raising awareness repeatedly, and also it was a matter of, another finding is about the pedagogy in higher education. So rather than trainers lecturing on CLIL, it was way more efficient when the lecturers used CLIL in their own lectures. So rather than me
telling you what it is,
exactly, sort of preaching about what it is, then we would be doing it. So we would have sort of a lesson in class, so with the students, and then we would be analyzing that experience. Because in some cases, these students had never attended a bilingual school or they had never experienced bilingual education themselves. So it was very difficult for them to sort of envisage or imagine that situation.
Yeah.
So they had to live it, experience it themselves first, so that it could make sense, or they could relate to it. So that was again another interesting finding.
It must have been quite a lot of reflection post lesson. Was that incorporated into the training?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so that was really helpful. And then about agency to encourage students to create their own materials, to create their own lessons, to adapt resources that they could find online.
When you say students, you mean student teachers, or
exactly,
the students?
Student
Yes,
teachers. Yeah, student teachers. So that was again a major finding, and it's not completely original, and what I'm saying has been said before 1,000 times, but it makes sense for these people, and for these programs and the student teachers and lecturers involved, because this shows you once again that no matter how many papers we write on this or that, or the research, teacher education sometimes is lagging behind in terms of what's happening in schools, or what could be working differently, or how things could be done more effectively, perhaps.
Is that because there's not a real conversation between research and practice?
Yes. I know that's a very short answer, but it is, because one of the things, and this is something that's happening with this other project on social justice that I am currently working on. So I am working with two teacher educators, two teacher trainers, and they have now realized that they don't know anything about schools anymore, because schools have changed so much and they are not in them. So they don't know, they feel like sort of alien now to the classroom. And it's funny, well, it's ironic, because they are preparing future teachers. So they should know what's going on in the classroom.
Absolutely.
So that was problematic, let's say, for my colleagues to realize, because it's not something nice to sort of discover about yourself, because then you feel that you are not really helping these teachers, well, future teachers. So that could be an issue. And in the case of CLIO, it is important because, for example, in the case of Latin America, it is relatively new, and we don't have enough programs that would specifically prepare teachers for CLIO. And in some cases, teachers receive in-service teachers. Receive a crash course or something that's more sort of compressed, and that's not enough. And there are lots of practical issues around them.
A question just before we're going to go for a quick break for the news, but before I do that, my question for you would be, there's a huge growth in international schools, bilingual schools. I mean, in Naples, where I live, in the last 8 years, there have probably been about 4 5, and it's not a huge city, but 4 or 5 bilingual schools have opened, and ELT teachers have kind of just moved over to the international schools, and they haven't had the formal training that they probably need to do that properly. Should CLIL be part of a PGCE, teacher education, from the very, very beginning?
I think so. This is the case of Austria, if I'm not mistaken. So in Austria, they have teacher education programs where CLIL is embedded.
Mm.
And so, for example, teachers, their qualification is to teach science through the medium of German or science through the medium of English.
Mm.
But that is because CLIL has been included in the curriculum, in the teacher education curriculum from day one.
Mm.
So that at the end of the day will give you bilingual teachers.
That's quite interesting, though, because they've got other languages, other formal languages.
Yes.
So they could be doing it in Italian or
yes, and it is and I think that in that way, and some similar projects are taking place in the Basque Country in particular. Because one of their concerns is whether the quality of the content in the additional language is the same as in the mainstream language, or whether because of CLIL or because of different factors, content is watered down in the bilingual lesson or in the English lesson as compared to, say, the Spanish
but
lesson.
Is that because of the level of students that are participating in the lesson?
It is because there are so it could be because of the students and their level of English. For example, in the case of English, is not high enough, so the teachers need to make the content easier. And it could be also connected to teachers' preparation, because if it is, if the CLIL teacher is a teacher of English or the language teacher, and that teacher is teaching science, but what she knows or he knows about science is minimal, then that creates problems. But again, it's got to do with what kind of education we want and what kind of aims these programs or these schools have. And if parents are happy with that kind of education, then that's fine, I suppose. But it is a constant issue around CLIL. I mean, teacher preparation and how to support teachers.
Okay, I'm going to pause you there, and okay. I will ask you some more about this when we come back from the break. We'll be right back.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. Have you checked out their latest releases? Don't miss out! Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading!
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
With the majority of pupils returning to schools this week, the new year has brought new announcements and new challenges for many in the education sector. Government advice about illness and staying away from education settings if you're sick was shared, and the issue of strikes remains a hot topic. Pressures on school leaders continue, with The Guardian reporting that many head teachers are broken, at risk of heart attacks and exhausted as a result of the erosion of services for children and families, meaning the burden of support is falling on the shoulders of schools too often. So, as the new year begins on a duller note than any of us might like, here are the top stories that have caught the eye of Teachers Talk Radio News this week. In Manchester, the Morning Star reports that students at one of the city's universities have launched a rent strike. Students at the University of Manchester are using the strike to press their demands for an end to what they describe as extortionate rents and their requests for a 30% cash rebate. Organisers say that more than 30 students per day are joining the protest, spurred by the combined effects of the cost of living crisis and poor quality accommodation provided at too high a cost. According to the National Union of Students, half of England's students are facing financial difficulty, with 3/4 of these saying they expect this to have an impact on their studies. A previous rent strike in Manchester in 2021 was successful, and students hope to replicate this outcome in this new wave of action. FE Week reports on Ofqual's decision to disband its committee of experts who advise on exam standards in favour of a more flexible approach on policy advice. The Standards Advisory Group has been active for more than a decade and was set up to help the exam watchdog maintain standards. Ofqual confirmed that the committee will be replaced to reflect a broader remit, such as expansions in vocational and technical qualifications and apprenticeships. Ofqual has faced criticism and upheaval over decisions and communication during the pandemic. Deputy Chief Regulator Michael Hanton described the change as positive and will secure quality and fairness for all those who take and use qualifications. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who recently announced his ambition to have all young people study maths to the age of 18, has faced a barrage of criticism about his plan. The newspaper reports that Robin Walker, chair of the Commons Education Select Committee, feels that the PM should be focusing more on the early years sector to boost education levels instead. He calls the maths plan highly challenging, citing the nationwide shortage of subject specialists as the biggest barrier. Mr Walker, Conservative MP for Worcester and a former Education Minister, highlighted issues around recruitment and retention, as people with maths qualifications are quite employable elsewhere, so it is a highly competitive market when it comes to drawing people into teaching. He added that focus on the early years sector would be the most effective way of supporting children, describing it as embarrassing that England's childcare system is rated so poorly when compared to other countries. The Eye also carries news of the decision by Catherine Birbalsingh to step down from her role as social mobility czar. Ms Birbalsingh, once dubbed Britain's strictest head teacher, has made the surprise announcement because she believes she comes with too much baggage, going on to say that her propensity to voice opinions that are considered controversial puts the Commission in jeopardy. Ms Birbalsingh wrote of her decision in a column in Schools Week. A controversial figure for many, but with an equally vociferous fan base, Ms Birbalsingh also commented that she felt the role of social mobility czar meant that she was becoming a politician, but that this was not a skill set she wished to develop. Finally, ITV News reports on how parts of a Turkish Airlines plane have been delivered to a school in Alveston, South Gloucestershire, to be turned into a new library. The project, named Flying High by pupils, will see parts of the plane turned into a new outdoor reading area. Full details can be found on the ITV website, with artist impressions of the final project showing children and adults enjoying the new space. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
This is 2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello! Did you know I've been doing this show for a year now? Well, if you didn't, now you do, so shower me in gifts and love. I'm kidding. But there is one person or group of people I want you to think about as this term draws to a close. Your tech support. They may, in your mind, be the people that say no to a lot of stuff. They may stop pupils playing games and stop a lot of the web getting into your classroom. But they keep you, your data, and your network safe. This week, as some of us are off, and others are desperate to be, roll on Wednesday, spare a thought for your techie. They'll be coming in over the break to patch and update. They'll be taking those broken machines and making them work again. These people, who in most schools are like ghosts. If Charles Dickens had had the privilege of tech support, they'd have been the spirits of modern day make do and mend. They wouldn't be draped in chains and padlocks, but come bearing an endless acceptable use policy. As you wind down, or if you have already, a thank you to your tech support will make your new year that little bit easier. Remember, next time you use tech in your lessons, everything is working because of them. As always, I'd love to hear what you want to know about tech. Let us know at TTR 2022. I'm Steve Woods, and that was 2 Minute Tech. Have a lovely break.
2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
And welcome back. Dario, what advice would you give teachers wanting to start teaching CLIL?
My advice would be to speak to other teachers to see whether this could be something that could be done at an institutional level, so that you have institutional support. So it would be beneficial, I would say, if teachers could work together, 2 teachers, 3, 4, but at least 2 teachers, so that they could support each other. So that would be my first advice, my first kind of suggestion. And then to find more information about about cases of good practice. And there are different, particularly in Italy, well, the EU in general has all these wonderful websites with lesson plans and different resources, so they could take a look at all the materials and all the resources that teachers have been producing over the years, just to have a flavor of what it may look like in practice, and just take it from there and see what is doable about CLIL. Because as it is an approach, then you don't have any set of specific guidelines that you need to follow. So it is pretty much in the hands of teachers to shape it in a way that they find doable, sustainable, beneficial, and that it doesn't require a lot of work. Because, again, this is one of the issues that teachers will have, that they don't have enough time to prepare everything for CLIL. So it's got to be something doable, and they could start little by little. So it could be something small, perhaps, let's say, 1 lesson a month or something like that, so that they get the experience.
A very slow, gradual approach.
Exactly. So a gradual approach would be helpful, so that then they become more confident and they can identify what works well and what things could be done differently. So I would go for something small first, because then if it is too ambitious and it doesn't work as you would think, then it becomes really frustrating and you don't want to do it again.
Yeah, I mean, I sympathize. It's certainly a lot of, there are so many wonderful, and we forget, we don't forget, we know that the teaching profession is a profession where we are expected to work before we go to work, after work. It's not a 3-month holiday job.
No.
We're constantly working, learning, and I think the pandemic has really proven that. Of all the professions, I think the teaching profession did an absolutely amazing job, just switching from one day to the next to online teaching, and but a lot of teachers, particularly working in foreign countries, get thrown into this, and it isn't as simple as you know to be a CLIL educator, and you do need input and support. What resources do they need apart from training?
So they, for resources, they need the support of the institution, and of course, articles or books that have a practical orientation, so that they have an understanding of different cases where CLIL has been implemented and in what contexts, and what kind of resources the institutions that implement CLIL have already in place. So in those cases where, because this could happen, of course, in those cases where training is not available, then you have the literature and articles and books about CLIL, and you could get in touch with teacher associations. And if, again, that is not an option, I usually encourage colleagues, teachers, to carry out their own action research, so that they sort of engage in self-initiated and self-led continuing professional development. And when you do it with or through action research, then you are generating your own knowledge and your own data, and you're doing it for yourself. So you don't have to think about publishing it or presenting it at conferences. You can if you want, but primarily the aim of that research is to improve your own teaching, and to reflect on your own teaching, and to support your students in different ways. So I would say that that's, again, really important for teachers to realize that they can do it, because sometimes, and in some contexts, they don't have the resources to implement CLIL, which has been supported through teacher training. So they want to do it, and some schools are really keen on implementing it, but they don't have, or there are no, let's say, trainers available, or they don't have a network that could support them.
Do you think there are any, I mean, I know the British Council has online training for CLIL. Would there be any online courses that you would recommend?
I follow this group on Facebook. I'm trying to remember the person who's behind this Facebook group, and it is about, I think it's called CLIL Teachers, and they offer webinars. I think they are yes, it's webinars, and there's a website with materials. And there's another website called CLIL for You, I think. And they have this massive collection. It could be a bit dated now, but they have this massive collection of lesson plans, but they do not have webinars or courses that you could take up, unfortunately. I am aware of different courses, but they are part of university degrees.
Yes,
like a master's program.
Yeah, I mean that was one of the realities of Italy, is that CLIL training is part of the university now. So it's all in their hands.
Because I'm just now thinking of this excellent program that's delivered entirely online by the University of Granada, I think, in Spain. And it is a master's program in CLIL.
Wow.
And it is online. So I think it is very popular program, at least in Spain.
Is that for Spanish teachers or for?
I think it is mainly for Spanish teachers, but I'm not quite sure now. I know that the director of the program, Marisa Pérez Cañado, I don't know if that name sounds familiar. So she's a big name in CLIL research internationally, but in Spain in particular, and she's the director of that program. But I think it is primarily aimed at Spanish teachers. Yes.
Wonderful. Do you think CLIL is the future of ELT?
I think bilingual education. So that's a very interesting question, because I work with, as I said before, with Do Coyle. She's the mother of CLIL, and she is leaving CLIL behind.
Oh.
So I keep on thinking, if she is leaving it behind, then I should be doing the same. Well, because now, and they have produced, when was it that they published this book called Beyond CLIL? So what they argue in that book is that we will be moving more into pluriliteracies, so that we recognize the different literacies involved in learning. And in the case of ELT, maybe the future of ELT would be in connection to making sure that we teach the different literacies involved in schooling, in academic writing, or in everyday language, and that we make learners aware of the different genres and uses of English in practice, rather
than the grammar lesson.
Exactly.
that
and
the
that
PPP. Yes. And also, do you? I don't know if you would agree with me. It might not just be about ELT. It might be about MLT, as in multi-language teaching, because now it's not just about English and another language. It can be 2 or 3 different languages.
Yes. And this is, for example, this project that I am working on with Joe on pluriliteracies in the Basque Country. So these teachers operate in 3 languages. So it is Basque, Spanish, and English. And so the lessons are delivered in those 3 languages. It's fascinating. And in the case of the ELT teachers, they again recognize the benefits of utilizing what people call translanguaging, utilizing all the languages that students have with them. And that again is important for teachers, because even though, of course, we have talked at length about the benefits of using the student's L1 in the ELT classroom, it is still a taboo in some cases, and it's a no-no. This is an English lesson, and of course there are very valid reasons for prioritizing English and teaching English through English, but it doesn't work all the time in every context.
No, and also I think with migration and immigration, with refugees, we need to be incorporating many. So translanguage.
Absolutely. So I think we just need to be more creative
More creative,
and
less rigid.
yes, absolutely, absolutely. And more aware of the context where we are teaching and who our students are, where they come from, not necessarily, or not only geographically speaking, but in terms of like their lived experiences, what they need English for, etc. So I think there is room for that. And it is connected to policy and to curriculum development, because we could have all these wonderful ideas, but then policymakers have other interests or other plans. And
I have a really good story for you about that. When CLIL was implemented in Italy, it was implemented from the final year of school.
Okay.
What's your take on that? And then they gradually moved back down the levels. So these poor fifth year, just about to finish school, suddenly had CLIL lessons as well. But that's the policymakers. So,
but it always happens. It's always, and again, that's another sort of gap between research, practice, and policy. And sometimes it is done for, well, sometimes, usually, it's done for political reasons, because they need to show something to the public. So they have, and I've seen that even in Argentina, different schools implementing CLIL without having trained the teachers. So they would implement first and then train the teachers. So yeah, that's also something to think about, the sort of, the alignment between policy, curriculum, and practice, and teacher preparation, because it very much depends on the different contexts. For example, I am working with Chinese student teachers, and they are just fascinated by the notion of CLIL. But at the same time, they know that it's going to be virtually impossible to implement in their schools in China, because the system is heavily test driven. So they have these high stake examinations. So everything is built around those exams. So they could not, they cannot be creative, or they feel that they cannot do this or that, because that doesn't help with the exams.
And there isn't a policy to allow them perhaps to do that.
Exactly, yes. So it is, and in some cases, because they've shown me, in some cases, the policy doesn't say anything, but that doesn't mean that they will have the freedom to do something different. And in some other cases, the policy is very explicit and very clear about what they can and what they cannot do.
So I'm looking forward to your next research paper. What how do you keep yourself motivated and on track? You do a lot of different things. How do you do that?
I think I keep myself motivated because I am privileged enough to do what I want.
Lucky you.
Yes, I have the agency and the freedom and the trust, I suppose, to do research on areas that I enjoy, to work with teachers. And what keeps me motivated is when I work with teachers, and when I work with students and student teachers and other trainers. So that keeps me going, because then you have an idea, or then you see something else, and they tell you something that they have been working on, or they have a problem. And they get in touch with me, and we sort of discuss things with them. And I usually work a lot with teacher associations. And it happened to me last year. So I usually work with ELT teachers, but last year I worked with teachers of French in Argentina because they wanted to implement CLIL. And again, to me, that was super exciting because I would be talking about CLIL with a completely different group of teachers, right? And I would be able to help them to some extent only because then it was going to be in French and I don't speak French. So that was fascinating. So I think those are the things that keep me motivated when things work well in practice and when they don't work well in practice as well, because then I want to find out why or how things could be done differently. So yes, and then I take a nap and that keeps me motivated. So I always have a nap. So yeah. And I'm not giving up on it.
I am a great believer in an afternoon nap. If I do have, even if it's like a 20-minute,
yes,
the rest of the afternoon is more productive, I think.
I totally, yes, I agree with that. And that's what I do. And that was one of the things I enjoyed the most during the pandemic because I was working from home. So I could have my nap on a regular basis every day.
Who inspires you?
Teachers. Teachers inspire me a lot. Teachers who are working in teacher associations, teachers who are involved in activism, they inspire me a lot because they are using their personal time, even sometimes their own financial resources to support projects, to support the community of teachers in their area. So they inspire me a lot because they have all these wonderful stories, and it could be wonderful stories. So they have, of course, sometimes really heartbreaking stories. So they inspire me, and some research, in particular, in my case, like Joe Coyle or Emma Ushioda in the field of motivation. But it's usually teachers, I would say, that inspire me.
Wonderful. And what are your plans for the future?
My plans for the future are to be working more into teacher preparation and curriculum development. So I want to do more work on how teachers are trained. So that's my the line of research that I want to explore in more detail now, because I am interested in diversity and inclusion. And again, some teachers feel that they would love to do more in terms of gender diversity, for example, and inclusion, but they don't have the preparation. So again, it brings us back to teacher education and PGTE programs, etc. So that's my kind of my line of inquiry in the future. Yeah.
I think you're definitely the right person to be doing this, and I wish you the best of luck with the policymakers and changing changing the way teacher education evolves. It's wonderful that we've got someone who has the practical and the academic. It's a wonderful match, and it's wonderful when you meet people who are doing that. Yeah,
I find it out. Thank you. Yes, I find it fascinating that I could still exploit those two areas, the practice and the theory and the research, And I have finally understood that things take time to change, and the research that we are producing now might have an impact in 10 years' time, perhaps. And it's
I
all
hope
about,
not that long.
well, hopefully, yes, hopefully sooner than that. But I think it is also a matter of how we communicate our research. Because if I just go to a conference or publish a paper, then I don't think policymakers have the time to read an article, to read a paper. So we need to find other ways of engaging with policymakers, with school admin people, so that we make it more accessible, so that we make our research way more accessible. Otherwise, we are just preaching to the converted. Because that's the funny thing, that is to say, people who are interested in CLIL will read my articles.
Absolutely.
On CLIL,
Yeah.
and that's where it ends. Yeah.
But we want people who don't know anything about it to know about it.
So again, it's got to do with how we communicate our research. And in that regard, this radio show is exactly
what we need.
Kind of venue. Exactly. No, but honestly, it is what we need, so that we make it more accessible and we make it more realistic at the same time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well,
so we could inspire people. So thank you again.
I hope we can inspire some people. The link is obviously where you download the recording. So please do take some time to have a read. I'm sure whether you are an ELT teacher or whether you are teaching in primary or secondary mainstream teaching, there's something for everyone, I think. And I it's fantastic the way you've covered so much. Dario, thank you so much for your time this morning. I've really, really enjoyed talking to you, and I will continue to follow you and learn from you. Thank you again for your time.
Well, thank you a lot, Jane, for the invitation. I have enjoyed this show and talking to you.
Okay, I hope to see you again.
Yes.
All the best.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.